Have you ever felt that sadness for no apparent reason? Wake up, look around, and it seems that everything has lost its luster. Nothing has changed on the outside, but inside you, something screams for attention. This silent feeling, often mistaken for weakness or laziness, may be the clearest sign that your soul is asking for change. Carl Jung, one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century, said that what we do not face in our unconscious ends up manifesting itself as destiny. And maybe what you're calling sadness, it is, in fact, a profound call for transformation. But the truth is, most of us have learned to ignore that call. We get distracted by social networks, we drown in tasks and convince ourselves that everything is fine. But it is not. And that's why you clicked on this video. Because, somewhere in there, you know it's time to look at yourself with more courage and less judgment. In this video, we will explore Jung's teachings together and discover how this emptiness can be the starting point for a powerful journey of self-knowledge and reconnection. If you're looking for more than ready-made answers, if you want to truly understand yourself, then subscribe to the channel right now. Here, we dive deep into the ideas that transform lives, with content that goes straight to the essence. Now take a deep breath, because what follows isn't just an explanation, it's an invitation to see your sadness in a new light. Because maybe, just maybe, imagine that your soul is like a river. Sometimes he runs calmly, at others, he seems to want to overflow. And when sadness appears, it's not because this river has dried up, but because he is trying to change course. What we call sadness is often the soul's way of telling us that something is no longer working, that it no longer fits in the space in which we try to force it to stay. We live in a society that values control, logic, quick results. We learn to silence feelings, to hide vulnerabilities, to disguise discomfort with automatic smiles. And when something inside us starts to hurt, for no apparent reason, the impulse is to ignore it, to pretend that it will pass. But it doesn't pass. Carl Jung said that the soul has its own paths. And when these paths are not being respected, she starts to speak. Sometimes with an inexplicable tiredness, other times with that discouragement that slowly infiltrates, making the days grayer and grayer. But what if this sadness is not the problem? What if it's the sign that you're moving too far away from who you really are? Jung believed that psychic pain was a kind of compass, a discomfort that arises not to bring you down, but to call you back to the center, to what is essential. Maybe you've stopped listening to your intuition. Maybe you have silenced old dreams, exchanging your essence for what the world expects of you. And now, this weight you feel in your chest is not weakness. It is a silent protest of the soul, asking for reconnection. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to understand everything at once. The most important thing is to recognize that something in you is asking for attention, and that's a great start. Because when you stop running away and start listening, you realize that this sadness carries a message. A message that can only be heard in silence. In the moments when you allow yourself to feel, without filters, without haste, without guilt. It is in this intimate space that truths begin to emerge. What is hurting in you may be just what is ready to be healed. And healing is not erasing. It's not pretending that nothing happened. It is welcoming. It is to give a name to what you feel. It is allowing yourself to change course. But this change does not happen externally first. It starts from within. It is when you decide, even if you do not know exactly how, that you will no longer ignore your pain. Who will look her in the face and ask, "What do you want to show me?" This is the turning point, because sadness, when heard, turns into direction. And then, everything starts to make sense. But understanding this language of the soul takes courage. Courage to dive into the unknown that dwells within you. Courage to break with old stories. Courage to accept that maybe it's time to let go of what no longer fits, even if it scares you. And that's exactly where you start to really listen to yourself, that the transformation can begin. Now that you understand that this sadness is not the end, but the beginning of a deep calling, let's take the next step. How to identify what, in fact, needs to change? Because listening to the soul is just the beginning. Identifying what needs to change is not always simple. Often, we are so used to pain that it becomes part of the landscape. You wake up tired, go to work on automatic, come home and repeat the cycle. Deep down, he knows that something is out of place, but he can't point out exactly what. And that's normal. When the soul begins to call, it does not always use clear words. Sometimes she's just restless. Restlessness is a powerful symptom. That feeling that you are in one place, but you should be in another. That you are living a life that no longer talks to who you have become. And when that happens, you have to stop and ask sincere questions. What have I accepted out of fear? Where have I been silent for convenience? At what times did I stop being true to myself to please others? These questions hurt because they put us in front of choices that we have postponed. But they also liberate. Jung said that what we deny submits us, and what we accept transforms us. So the first step to change is to have the courage to look at what you have been avoiding. Because what you avoid facing is precisely what is holding you back. Maybe the relationship you're in no longer has love, only attachment. Perhaps the work that gives you stability is draining your life energy. Maybe you're surrounded by people, but feeling deeply alone. Pain, in these cases, is the sign that something in you has already realized that it is no longer possible. But beware, change is not abandoning everything overnight. It is not throwing everything up without direction. It is, first of all, to become aware. It's getting out of autopilot. It is to stop justifying the unjustifiable. When you start noticing the little annoyances, they turn into guides. They show you what you need to tweak, revise, maybe even rebuild from scratch. The problem is that the change is scary. Even when we know what needs to be done, fear arises. Fear of disappointing, fear of losing, fear of the new. And that's why so many people stay where they are, even if unhappy. Because the comfort zone, despite its name, is rarely comfortable, but it is known. And the unknown requires a leap. But Jung also said that your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Whoever looks outside, dreams. Whoever looks inside, awakens. It is by looking inside that you begin to see clearly what is out of place. You don't have to change everything at once. But it needs to take a step. Only one. Maybe it's talking to someone about how you feel. Maybe it's starting to say, no more. Maybe it's just admitting to yourself that you're not okay, and it's okay not to be. Because it is in this honest recognition that true change begins. Not in great external revolutions, but in small acts of daily courage. In the way you position yourself, how you respect yourself, how you listen to yourself. And when you listen more carefully, you realize that what seemed like just sadness has a name, has an origin, and, above all, has a purpose. Now that we understand how to identify the signs of what needs to be transformed, it's time to look ahead. What to do, then, with this inner calling. How to take the first steps towards a life with more truth and less weight. That's what we're going to explore next. Taking the first step towards change is often the most challenging moment of all. You have already understood that sadness has a message. He has already begun to see what no longer makes sense in his life. But what now? What to do with all that you're feeling? This is where a lot of people get stuck. Because when the soul asks for change, it does not deliver a detailed map. She just whispers, go ahead. And moving forward requires faith. Not faith in the religious sense, but faith in oneself, in one's own intuition, in the instinct that comes from within and says that there is something greater waiting. The path of real change is not linear. It is made of comings and goings, of falls and new beginnings. There is no magic formula, but there is an internal movement that, once started, can no longer be ignored. Start small. Don't expect to have everything planned to act. Sometimes what you need is to change the way you start your day. Create a routine that welcomes you instead of overwhelming you. It can be writing a diary, walking in silence, disconnecting a little from the noise of social networks. These are simple attitudes, but they send a clear message. I'm here for me. Change starts with presence. Be present in yourself. Feel what needs to be felt. Name emotions. Don't judge yourself for being confused, lost, or afraid. This is part of the process. Jung said that the soul is healed when it is with children. And what he meant by this is that we need to relearn to treat ourselves with the kindness we would give to a wounded child. With patience, with care, with listening. It is important to remember that the soul is not interested in success in the world's pattern. She wants meaning. He wants connection. He wants truth. That's why, sometimes, it takes you out of places that seemed right, takes you away from people who seemed indispensable, puts you on unknown paths. Not as a punishment, but as a way to bring you closer to who you really are. This process also involves accepting that not everyone will understand your change. And that's okay. When you begin to transform, some relationships break down naturally, not out of malice, but because you no longer belong to that same emotional space. Resisting this only prolongs the pain. Allowing life to go with its flow is one of the greatest acts of self-love you can practice. In this new path, self-responsibility becomes your ally. Understand that no one will make this journey for you. No one can hear your soul in your place. Advice can help, books can guide, videos can inspire. But the decision to move comes from within. From that point on, every choice you make carries a new weight. A good weight. The weight of conscience. You start to choose with more intention. To say more yes to what expands and more no to what limits. To get closer to people who really listen to you. To create internal and external spaces where your soul can breathe. Of course, there will be difficult days. Moments of doubt. But they are also part of it. They're reminders that you're on the go. That he is alive. That he is, little by little, leaving behind the version of himself that carried the pains of others, the weights that were not his own, the expectations that no longer fit. And it is precisely at this point in the journey, when the transformation has already begun, but still seems fragile, that the inevitable question arises: how to sustain this change? How not to go back to the old patterns? That's what we're going to explore next. Sustaining change is often more difficult than initiating it. In the beginning, there is the drive, the motivation, even the euphoria of having finally understood what needs to be transformed. But over time, when the routine tightens again, when old habits begin to knock on the door, the soul is put to the test again. And then comes the temptation to go back, to return to the known, even if that known hurts. It is natural for this to happen. The mind, by instinct of protection, seeks stability. And every change, even the most positive one, is uncomfortable at first. Therefore, it is necessary to understand that maintaining the path of transformation requires constancy and, above all, presence. It's not about perfection, but about consciousness. One of the biggest mistakes we make is believing that taking a step back means failure. But the truth is that the process of change is cyclical. Sometimes, you will need to go back a little to reorient yourself, to regain strength, to remember why you started. The important thing is not to lose yourself on this path. Creating rituals can help a lot at this point. Rituals are like anchors that keep your soul connected to purpose. It can be a daily moment of silence, a short meditation, reading a passage that inspires you, a walk without distractions. What matters is not the form, but the intention, to remember every day that you are choosing to stay true to who you are becoming. It is also essential to take care of the environment around you. Not all transformation survives in dry soil. If you want to flourish, you need to water your roots with true relationships, deep conversations, spaces where you can be who you are without fear. This may mean moving away, little by little, from people or places that pull you back to old versions of yourself. And yes, that can be painful, but liberating. Jung believed that human beings only find balance when they learn to dialogue with their shadows. In other words, it is not enough to cultivate light. It is also necessary to welcome what still hurts, what is still difficult, what still causes shame. Because it is in the encounter with these forgotten parts of us that the real strength lies. Therefore, sustaining change involves a deep work of self-compassion. You won't get it right every time. You will feel like giving up. There will be days when everything will seem confusing again. But that doesn't invalidate his process. The important thing is to keep coming back to yourself. Boys. Another powerful key is emotional honesty. Stop saying it's okay when it's not. Learn to express yourself truthfully, even if it bothers you. The repression of feelings is one of the main causes of internal stagnation. When you feel and allow yourself to express, you make room for the energy to circulate, and the soul feels heard. It's also helpful to remember that true progress is silent. It doesn't need to be displayed, nor validated by anyone. You don't have to prove anything. Your soul knows the way. And even on days when everything seems stagnant, no, inside you, the movement continues. And so, step by step, you build a new reality, not based on other people's expectations, but on your innermost truth. You learn to honor your choices, to respect your limits, to say no firmly and yes with joy. And when this new version begins to take hold within you, a powerful feeling arises: belonging. You're no longer trying to fit in. He is finally finding himself. But there is still an essential point for this journey to become complete. The point that, if ignored, can make everything lose meaning. How to align this inner transformation with the purpose of life. How to make all this lead to a more meaningful, more whole, more real life. That's what we'll see next. Getting this far is, in itself, a great act of courage. You recognized sadness as a sign, identified what needed to change, started the process, and most of all, decided to sustain it. But all this internal transformation cries out for a direction. Where is all this taking you? What's the point of rebuilding yourself if it doesn't bring you closer to something bigger? And this is where one of the deepest questions of human existence comes in: purpose. Purpose is not a fixed goal, it is not a profession, nor a status to be achieved. It is, above all, a connection with what gives meaning to your life. It is the invisible thread that connects who you are to what you do in the world. And when this connection happens, even the difficult days gain meaning. Because you understand that you're heading in the right direction, even if the terrain is uneven. But finding that purpose doesn't happen from the outside in. It is not hidden in self-help books or ready-made formulas. It is born in silence, in self-knowledge, in the dive you have decided to make within yourself. Carl Jung said that what you resist persists, what you accept is transformed. And purpose comes from exactly that place of deep acceptance, when you stop trying to be someone else and finally start living as you are. One of the most authentic ways to connect to purpose is to observe where your soul expands. In what moments do you feel total presence? What arouses your enthusiasm effortlessly? What would you do even if no one was looking? The answers are not always obvious, but they are always there, waiting for you to hear. Often, the purpose is hidden behind the pain you have experienced. There is a silent wisdom in traumas, losses, falls. When you heal a part of yourself, that healing can become a bridge to help others. And perhaps this is the deepest meaning, to transform his story into service, into presence, into a true contribution to the world. But beware, purpose is not synonymous with productivity. It's not something that forces you to be in constant action. It is an internal direction, something that, when you follow it, makes everything align. Even the simple becomes sacred. Even everyday life gains brightness. Because you are whole in what you do. However, aligning this inner transformation with the purpose of life requires active listening. It is necessary to develop a sensitivity to perceive the signs, the so-called subtle, the synchronicities that life puts in your path. Jung called this the process of individuation, the movement of becoming who you are in essence, breaking with masks and standards that have been imposed over time. And when you start living from that essence, everything changes. Their relationships become more true. Your choices more conscious. Your firmer limits. You stop living to please and start living with presence. It's no longer about being accepted, it's about being authentic. And that authenticity attracts what's real. Of course, living with purpose doesn't mean living without fear. But it means living in spite of fear. It means doing what needs to be done even with trembling hands. It is trusting that by aligning with your truth, the universe responds. Not with magic, but with coherence. And then, something powerful happens. You stop surviving and start living. No longer dragged by the days, but guided from within. Because now there is direction, there is meaning, there is root. And this is where we approach the end of that journey. An end that, in fact, is the beginning of a new way of living. There remains one last essential reflection for this journey to be completed. What does it mean, after all, to live in peace with one's own soul? Let's complete this path together. We've reached the end of this journey, but in fact, this is just the beginning of a new way of living. More conscious, more true, more connected to what really matters. Along this path, we look at sadness not as an enemy to be fought, but as a messenger of the soul. A sign that something inside us can no longer be ignored. We realize that what hurts is often precisely what drives us to change. We learned that change is not about abandoning everything at once, but rather about starting to listen. Listen to what is screaming in the silence. Listening to the body, the emotions, the forgotten dreams. We also learned that sustaining a transformation requires continued courage, daily presence, and a deep commitment to truth itself. Because it's not about achieving a perfect version of yourself, but about building, day after day, a life that is worthy of your essence. Finding purpose is not finding a title, a career path, or a status. It's figuring out what makes sense to you. It is living in line with what expands your soul. It's letting your story, including the most difficult part of it, turn into power. Every step you take toward your authenticity is also a step toward a fuller life. And what does all this teach us? That living in peace with one's soul does not mean living without pain. Life will continue to bring challenges, losses, new beginnings. But now, with this new look, you no longer walk in the dark, because he knows his way back to himself. And this is the greatest freedom that someone can conquer. To be at peace with yourself is to accept who you have been, to respect who you are, and to trust who you are becoming. It is to stop fighting with reality and start building a reality with more meaning. It's about stopping sabotaging yourself and starting to support yourself. It's knowing that you don't have to fit into ready-made templates, because you were made to live in a unique way. This peace is also born from respect for your cycles. There will be days of strength and days of fragility, moments of clarity and moments of doubt. And all of this is part of the process. The important thing is to keep going back inside, always. Because it is there, in this silent and deep place, that the answers live. Carl Jung said that what you do may be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it. This phrase sums up everything we have experienced so far. It doesn't matter if the steps are small, if the advances seem slow. What matters is to keep moving. Keep saying yes to yourself. Keep choosing yourself every day. Now the invitation is made. Not to change who you are, but to remember who you've always been. Turn inward, listen to your soul, and have the courage to live the life it is asking for. Because at the end of the day, it's not about achieving something outside, it's about coming home, to your center, for your truth. And that, yes, is the true awakening.